What's up everyone, and welcome to Breakbeat. Today we're retuning and switching the snare wires out on this gorgeous Mapex Predator. This 14x6 tank of a copper shell has a lot of weight to it, both physically and within its sound profile. This snare is still a fairly new one in my collection, so because of that all of the components are still stock, bar that Remo R-Beat batter head on the top. Even if it's just for a retune, I always make sure that I take both heads completely off so that I know when it comes to reseating the heads, all the tension rods will go in at the exact same tension. To prevent severe arthritis in my wrist at the age of 23, I like to use a drill for the general disassembly and reassembly of the shell, but then using a drum key for the more accurate tuning. Whenever you remove your heads, just always make sure you give them a once over and look for any pitting or damage. It'll be way more obvious when the head is loose than when it's tightened up and still on the snare. Once that head's off, we can flip it over and begin work on the snare side. Not to yuck anyone's yum, but I've never been a huge fan of string-tied snare wires. I find that getting an equal tension on both sides can be way more difficult and take way more time. So I prefer to use a strap or cross-grain ribbon. We are also going to be exchanging these snare wires today, but these ones still look pretty good, so I'm going to put them aside, maybe to use on a later project. Now those are off, let's get to the snare side head. Luckily, this stock resonant head doesn't seem to have much damage to it, however you can see in some of the lighting that there are some creases in it, and that is what you want to be looking out for. Once it's more crease than snare, that's time to switch the bottom head out. I am also going to treat the hardware to a little bit of a wipe down with some Dr. Liston's chrome polish, but only really on the chrome plated hardware. The main reason I'm focusing on the hardware is because chrome picks up fingerprints and dust like nothing else. However, the brushed copper shell of this snare doesn't really pick them up that much, so I only really need to give it a very quick, very brief once over. Now that's got some nice shine to it, we can work on getting those heads back on. I always start with the batter head just to get a general idea of the tone before then attaching the snare side head, and then I switch between the two just to tighten it up to that exact sound I want. So just after deciding where I want that head to sit, I can slap that rim back on, using the drill to drop everything in a decent amount, and then using finger tightness to get it to a good point, and then for the final, finer points, I'm using the drum key. Speaking of which, let's flip back on over to that snare side and work on getting that head on using the same method we did with the batter head. As you can tell, I'm quite OCD about the positioning of my snare heads, even on the reso side, even though no one other than me and maybe my drum tech will see it. Oh wait, I am the drum tech. Now that's done, you can slap that rim back on, making sure it's lined up properly with the snare mechanism and get it dropped in so it is nice and tight to that head. Again, we're probably going to end up going back over this head to give it a bit of an adjustment anyway, but let's get it sounding pretty good first. And now here's the fun part, slapping those brand new snare wires onto this snare. These are some Evans 24-strand pure sound brass wires, and they sounded gorgeous on my last snare, which was also a Mapex, so I cannot wait to see how they sound on this. Now, as is the case with most mid to high range snares, the snare mechanism on this snare has two different adjustment knobs, one on the snare side and one on the butt plate side. I'm going to drop both of these knobs down to the absolute loosest they can be, just so I can get a proper gauge for the distance from the snare wires to that resonant head, and then from there I can tighten it up. So I'm spending a little time here just figuring out what kind of sound I want from this snare and adjusting accordingly, but I do always like my snare wires nice and tight, so that is a lot of what I'm doing here. Another reason I love these wires is because they come with a strap that does have measurements on as well. So if you're super meticulous about your tensions like me, this really helps make sure you've got even tension on both sides. I'm pretty happy with that. Let's see how it sounds. Right, you've got to give me some credit there. Even on camera audio, I think that sounds absolutely gorgeous. If you want your snare breaking some sound barriers and just sounding like an absolute tank, then drop me a DM or visit breakbeatmusicrepair.co.uk to check out all our services. Big thanks to all you drum nerds for watching. Have a wonderful day.